Good morning and welcome to the 9th meeting of the Education and Skills Committee. Our first item is decided to take item 3, which is discussion on today's evidence in private. Does everyone agree to do so? Thank you very much. I now move to agenda item 2, which is our main business today, an evidence session with the Scottish Qualification Authority on response to the coronavirus outbreak. Before we begin taking evidence, can I put on record my thanks to the teachers and the young people who took time to take part in our focus group and to feed into our submissions. Can I welcome today from the Scottish Qualifications Authority, Fiona Robertson, Chief Executive and Chief Examining Officer, and also Robert Quinn, Head of English, Languages and Business. And a very warm welcome to you both. We thank you for your time today, and I would like to invite Fiona Robertson to make an opening statement.
Thank you very much, Convener. We welcome the opportunity this morning to discuss our approach to certification following the cancellation of exams in 2020. As the Deputy First Minister said on the 19th of March, exams in Scotland have been held every spring since 1888. As an education system, we are therefore in a situation which is unprecedented and very challenging. For the 138,000 young people who have worked hard and were due to start their exams this week, I fully appreciate that this is a worrying time for them and their families. As Scotland's Chief Examiner, I'm absolutely committed to ensuring that learners' work is rightly and fairly recognised this year and allows them to progress to further learning or work. I want to ensure the class of 2020 can hold their heads high now and in the future, with their qualifications fully recognised as they would be in any year. The cancellation of exams required us to consider, review and adapt our processes in a very short space of time. We consider contingency arrangements every year, including this year, but the scale and complexity of the changes required and at this time of year are simply unprecedented. I can give the committee an assurance that a huge volume of work has been taken forward at pace to deliver results on 4th of August. And while the focus of the committee and my opening statement is on the 148 externally assessed national qualifications across National 5, Higher and Advanced Higher, we have also needed to consider with stakeholders the full range of SQA qualifications, Nationals 2, Nationals 3, Nationals 4, National Certificates, National Progression Awards, Skills for Work courses, freestanding units for national qualifications, Higher National Certificates and Higher National Diplomas, offered across a wide range of subjects in schools and colleges across Scotland. Following the Deputy First Minister's statement and my subsequent statement on the 19th of March, I provided further advice on the completion of coursework on 24th of March and the approach that we would be taking to certification on 2nd of April before the Easter break for most schools. Further, more detailed guidance and advice were provided at the start of term on 20th of April. We have also provided a timeline of further advice and support to colleges. Our approach is based on 3 core principles. Fairness to learners, safe and secure certification of our qualifications while following the latest public health advice, and maintaining the integrity and credibility of our qualification system, ensuring that standards are maintained over time and in the interest of learners. Results will be based on estimated grades. Detailed guidance and an online course have been provided to schools and colleges to assist with the estimation process. Teachers and partners from across education helped inform the approach and the guidance. Estimated grades rely on the professional judgment of teachers and lecturers who are best placed to have a strong understanding of how their learners have performed and, based on their experience and the evidence available, what a learner would be expected to achieve in each course. I should clarify that an estimated grade is not just the result of one prelim or project, because I do know many young people have told us they are worried about their prelim performance, but it is an overall judgment based on all activity across the year. I have asked for more detailed estimates and candidate rankings this year to give us a more differentiated data to inform the awarding process. Schools and colleges are working hard to provide us with their estimates for each course at the extended deadline on the 29th of May, and I am very grateful for all the work that is being done collectively to deliver for learners. Beyond 29th of May, we will check and validate the information, moderate it if it is necessary to ensure consistency across schools and colleges and with results from previous years. The moderation process is a key part of SQA's responsibilities every year to ensure that standards are maintained across Scotland, and this year across schools and colleges in the absence of external assessment. Teacher judgment is at the heart of Scottish education, and every year effective professional judgments for assessment take place in schools and colleges and are supported, validated and enhanced through moderation. This year, we are asking for internal moderation of teacher estimates using a range of data and discussion within a school or college, and we will also be undertaking a moderation exercise nationally using a range of data and discussion and review. This is to ensure as far as possible that the standard of an A in one school is the standard of an A in another school and so on. There is no presumption that moderation is one way. Grades could be moderated up or down. The final details of the moderation process are being finalised and considered through our Qualifications Committee and Advisory Council next week, before going to our board, alongside details on our proposed appeals service, which the committee will be pleased to hear is free. We have extended the external membership of our Qualifications Committee to advise us. This includes advice from young people themselves. I am of course happy to follow up with the committee and of course will publish full details at the appropriate time. In conclusion, we are working hard to deliver in this extraordinary year. We have had to take some difficult decisions as circumstances have changed, but we are engaging with a range of stakeholders to both inform our thinking and to ensure that concerns are understood and responded to in the right way. I acknowledge the points made by teachers and young people in the committee's focus groups. Indeed, we have had some very positive feedback from teachers and lecturers. And I would also highlight that other exam regulators who I am in close contact with across the UK are working through very similar issues at present. With the support of the system, including members of the committee, we can provide the reassurance learners need and the results they deserve on the 4th of August. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee this morning in its first full virtual meeting, and we are of course happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms Robertson, for your opening remarks. I'll now move to questions from committee members, and I can ask Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, Ms Robertson and Mr Quinn. I took part in Focus Group 1 with teachers, and I just wanted to start by making a comment about what we heard about communication with the SQA in relation to the current situation. I mean, while the teachers acknowledged this was unprecedented, the majority impression seemed to be that communication was slow, at times was top-down, and there sometimes was an attitude of business as usual, and there was a certain lacking in sort of working with the teacher at this very unusual time. So I wonder if you could make that point about slow communication, being reactive rather than proactive, and if I could have your comments on that, please.
Thank you. Happy to do so. We've obviously been working through a range of issues over a period of some weeks. We issued our first public statement in relation to the coronavirus on the 3rd of March, and a further statement on the 2nd of March. The first meeting of the Scottish Government's National Qualifications Contingency Group met on the 17th of March, and there was thereafter a joint statement by the Scottish Government and the SQA on the 18th of March. On the 19th of March, the Deputy First Minister announced the closure of school, and I provided a further statement. Over the course of that following weekend, it became clear that it was, following public health advice, it would be very difficult for considerable numbers of young people to go into schools to complete coursework, and we provided a further statement on the 24th of March. As I highlighted in my opening statement, I was able to outline our approach to the approach to certification in broad terms on the 2nd of April, and with further detail following the Easter break on the 20th of April. This week, we also made available an online course as part of our SQA Academy service to provide support to teachers and lecturers on the estimation process. At the same time, we've also been engaging with the National Parent Forum for Scotland. We've also had a lot of engagement with Young Scot and with other young people's groups. We've also undertaken some focus groups with teachers in relation to the new systems that we have been setting up, as well as discussions with teachers informing our guidance on our approach. And Robert, we'd be happy to say a little more about that. I mean, I think we've tried very hard to communicate through a variety of channels over the course of the last 6 weeks or so, and that's included our recognised and established channels through schools and colleges. So communicating, all those communications that I mentioned have gone directly to every school and college across Scotland. Obviously using our website, social media channels, etc. too. And I know that schools and colleges themselves have been keen to ensure that those messages are considered and taken forward with their teams and of course with young people as well. So I think we have worked as quickly as we can using a variety of communication channels, and we have been working really very hard to provide the clarity that the system needs to relieve anxiety and to provide reassurance to the system about what we're doing. But as I highlighted in my opening statement, this has been a very challenging period. It's been an unprecedented situation that we've been facing, and we've been working through that as quickly as possible. I hope my answer does outline the speed at which we've been able to respond to this set of circumstances and the communications that we've been putting out to the system since early March.
Thank you. Does Mr. Quinn want to come in on that point?
Yes, Convener, thank you. Just to reinforce what Fiona was saying in relation to the advice and guidance on the critical aspect of estimating, which is obviously the bedrock of what we're going to be using this year for certification. So we adapted our current guide for estimating and produced a revised guide on the 20th of April. And then I think over the period of about 3 or 4 days, we developed an online academy model, and we tested it on an ongoing basis with about 50 teachers, principal teachers, and some of our key appointees. And we've tested and refined that and then launched that. And we've had actually quite positive feedback, you know, in terms of comments like people being comfortable now with the level of advice and the academy course answering the key questions. And we keep checking in with teachers during the estimating process now. So particularly in the large departments where there's a lot of complexity in the work, we're getting feedback around some of the challenges that they're facing and are able to, in real time, through our subject implementation managers, offer advice and support.
Thank you. Ms. Mackay?
Thank you, and thank you for those answers. I mean, I suppose I just wanted to say that you know, teachers have very many questions naturally, and I think they would want to be reassured that those questions that they have about whatever aspect would be answered quickly and you know, without any kind of you know, bureaucracy getting in the way. So if I can move on, please, to my final point, which is about it relates to fairness for learners and the concern for pupils who have poor home environments for learning and are either disadvantaged technically or motivationally, and would perhaps have gone to you know, holiday study classes, etc., for to help them. How much weight you know, will the SQA in conjunction with teachers put on the factor that you know, it's different for some pupils who don't have ideal conditions?
Ms Robertson?
Okay, thank you. Happy to answer that. Just to pick up one final point in relation to Ms Mackay's comment on communications. We have had lots of questions from teachers through our liaison team, through SQA coordinators, and through our contact centre, and also from young people and their parents. And we've been developing and evolving our frequently asked questions on our website and through other channels as well, just to make sure that all those questions that are coming through, that we're doing our best to answer. On the critical question of fairness, absolutely. I think we were very conscious during the course of following the announcement on the 19th of March by the Deputy First Minister that exams were cancelled, and of course that followed the decision to close schools. I think at that point we were hopeful that young people could continue to attend school in some limited sense to complete coursework. But it became very evident over the course of that weekend, that first weekend, that was no longer going to be feasible given public health advice. And that led us to issue, I hope, that what was quite clear guidance about the completion of coursework on the 24th of March. And fairness was very much at the forefront of our minds in making that decision on the basis, and having discussed that with some head teachers and with some directors of education, that was absolutely the prevailing view, that absolutely in the interest of fairness that we took that decision. I think also, and Robert again may want to come in here on the basis of the detail contained in the advice on estimates. I think we've taken quite a lot of care about the advice that we provide for teachers and lecturers about the evidence that they should use in arriving at their estimates this year, and care, quite a lot of care being applied to any work that has been done subsequent to school closures on the 20th of March. Robert may want to just say a little bit more about that, but I think that's something we've been very, very conscious of, and indeed led to the decision around coursework.
Okay, thank you. Mr Gibson, would you like to come in? Oh, Mr Quinn, sorry.
No problem. Just very quickly to say, we were very clear that no candidate should be disadvantaged if they're unable to complete work after centres were closed. And in our advice to teachers, we are very much emphasising it's the quality of the evidence that you're reviewing and what you know about the young person or indeed or candidate. It's not so much the quantity. The predictive value of evidence, what it tells you about the learner's journey and where they lie in relation to grade criteria, isn't always informed by vast quantities of evidence, but it's more about the consistency of their performance, how they deal with some key discriminating aspects of the course, etc. And that can be successfully achieved using incomplete evidence, and that's been quite a bit of our focus in our advice and guidance to teachers and indeed the follow-up online course.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to questions from Mr Jamie Green.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning to our panel. Thank you for joining us. I have a number of questions. I'll try and get through them as quickly as I can. My first question really is a general question, and that is around the decision to cancel exams in their entirety. Who took that decision? And in taking that decision, what consultation took place? With whom? That would help you come to that conclusion. What other options were considered? And what is it that made the SQA feel confident that that was the best course of action?
Thank you. Ms Robertson?
On the issue of exams being cancelled, you may be aware that the Scottish Government and SQA issued a joint statement on the 18th of March following the first meeting of the Qualifications Contingency Group. And in that communication, I think we were very conscious of that there were very significant risks to the diet, which obviously had emerged before that point, and that we were working through a range of scenarios, including significant disruption to the diet. And we were working on the basis that I think there was still hope, I suppose, at that point that exams could still go ahead, even in the event of school closures. That effectively schools could still operate as exam centres over the period of April, towards the end of April and May. But it became very clear in discussions with the Scottish Government that was not possible. The decision to cancel exams was made by the Scottish Government, and that was a decision that was taken by the Deputy First Minister. Obviously, that was a decision which was discussed with the SQA. It may have been discussed with others. That will be something that you'll want to follow up with the Deputy First Minister next week. But and on that basis, I was commissioned to develop an alternative certification model in the absence of exams, and that yes.
No, it's fine.
Mr. Green?
Sorry, I appreciate there's a short delay. It's quite hard to interject in the normal way. Apologies. Sorry, just therefore, this decision was made by the Scottish Government, but you and your organisation must have informed that decision. Did you make any recommendations, or did you simply present options of what could happen?
So I obviously had. Yes, apologies, convener. Apologies, the short delay is
Indeed.
there. I obviously had a number of discussions with the Scottish Government over a period of time, and indeed very regular discussions with Scottish Government officials and indeed Scottish ministers. We, as I've said, and it's a matter of public record, I have said that we were working through a range of contingencies, and as it was right and proper to do so, and those contingencies settled around, in particular, disruption to the diet, a significant disruption to the diet. And what we were working through there was that there may be either significant absences or days or exams that could not be taken in the normal way across some subjects and some qualifications. So we were starting to work through issues around, for example, having contingency days, perhaps later on, and that would have necessitated some additional papers. So for some qualifications, having 2 or more papers. We also looked at delay of the exam diet as well. We also had considered issues in relation to delay of the diet until later. But I think that obviously around all of that, there were assumptions that we needed to play in around how this obviously very significant public health situation would play out. But it became very evident, as I say, over the course of 18th and 19th of March, that schools were going to be closed potentially for some considerable period, and on that basis, it would not be possible to have an exams diet in 2020. And as I say, that was a decision that was made by the Scottish Government.
Mr. Green? Oh, sorry. Ms. Robertson, please continue.
No, it's fine.
Okay, Mr. Green?
Okay, thanks, convener. I mean, we are where we are. There are not exams taking place in this academic year. I think some other members may have questions down the line about what happens next year. There's been some talk around that. But I think what is absolutely vital, I think there are maybe 2 things that you could comment on. One is we have shifted that workload to teachers, where normally students would be taking exams and there would be a due process involved there. It is now down to that job is now down to teachers to come up with estimations, of which you will then moderate. I think the key question that many people will have, both the pupils themselves, but also teachers and parents, is how are you going to ensure fairness and consistency? And I think those are the 2 key words that jump out at me that people will be looking for, is to ensure that the the qualifications that people get this academic year are no more or less valid than anyone else has had in the years gone by and in years to come, and indeed will be fair and consistent across Scotland, different schooling environments, different levels of ability. I appreciate that as a tremendously difficult task, but how on earth are you going to try and achieve that?
Ms Robertson?
Yes, I mean, I fully appreciate that we're absolutely asking a lot of the system this year, and I think I think we've been really struck in the discussions that we've had with teachers that they are working through those issues and doing the very best they can for their young people to ensure that their hard work and their achievements are recognised. And as working through what we've asked them to do, and our focus has been on providing as much help and assistance to allow them to do that, and that will continue over the coming weeks. I mean, I fully agree with what you have said about the point, and indeed I highlighted it in my opening statement, that it is really, really important that the class of 2020 get qualifications that will stand the test of this year and the challenges of this year, but also most importantly stand the test of time, and that is the job that I, along with my team at SQA and the wider system, is seeking to do. And by working together, I do believe that we can do that. And while schools will be going through a moderation process using a range of data which is specific to them, and that range of data can include looking at estimates that they've provided us in the past and how that has compared with the outturn, effectively the results that they have achieved. That can include looking at the pattern and volume of attainment within a school, as well as class and departmental discussions about the process of estimation. And I know that is happening already, and as I say, we've had some good feedback from schools in recent days about the work going on to do that in the most credible and fairest way possible. When we get that information, it is also really important that we are allowed to look at that information. As I highlighted in my opening statement, a kind of quality assurance or moderation is a principal feature of the qualifications system that we have, and it's actually a fully accepted one, that we go in and that we have a look at particularly those qualifications which have a high level of internal assessment, so not exam-based in the conventional sense assessment, and it's really important that we ensure fairness and consistency as far as that is possible across Scotland, and that is the job that we will be seeking to do when we look at the estimates. There is not a presumption here that we will change the estimates that schools make, but we have to have a mechanism in place to validate, to provide reassurance, and if necessary, we have to reserve the right of making some changes to estimated grades. But fairness and consistency is a central part of what we are here to do. That is a central part of what SQA does every year. Now, I would fully acknowledge this is a very challenging year, and we are all working through a very difficult situation that none of us really could have fully anticipated. But we are working very hard to work through those issues the best way that we can, and we will do that with the system as far as that is possible.
Mr. Green?
Thank you. I think there is still some trepidation. I hosted one of the focus groups with a number of teachers, and I've since read the notes from other focus groups, and they were all saying the same thing, which is interesting. Teachers from right across the country, from different backgrounds and different locations, with the same concerns that in order to achieve consistency, that will jeopardise fairness, because some of the measures that you will introduce to ensure that the national picture looks appropriate at a granular level, some students may not get the awards that the teachers think are due to them, and indeed that some of the students will look at the qualification they've received and be tremendously unhappy with it, and because of those national consistency measures that you've applied. So there is still concern. Whilst I appreciate you're coming at this from good faith, what further reassurance can you give parents and pupils that you will get this right? And if you don't get it right, there will be due procedures there to help those people.
So, I mean, I think there's. I mean, the question that you asked, will consistency jeopardise fairness? Well, I think consistency can assist with fairness, and I think there's something quite important here about the process that is underway. I think what we're doing is investing a huge amount of time working with the system to ensure that we get the best estimates we can, and by that I mean the most credible estimates that we can, and teachers will be looking at very similar sets of information as we will be looking at, both locally and of course we'll be looking at some national information as well. I think there's a really important piece here though about moderation, because you know, Robert may want to elaborate here, but when even at present, when we go into schools to do quality assurance of internally assessed units, for example, or looking, and Robert may want to give some examples from his own subject areas. There are many instances where we take a judgment that actually that the moderation should be in the upwards direction. So there's an important point about symmetry in the approach that we're taking. That this is not that what we're not seeking to do here is to look at teacher estimates and moderate down. I'm not going into this with any presumption that would be the case at all. But we do need to look at the data that we hold, and that will include a range of information that we have both at centre and national level across, as I say, the 148 subjects. And we will want to pause and reflect and consider whether that looks reasonable. Now, so and if on the 4th of August a young person gets a set of results that they don't expect and the school don't expect, we will be offering an appeal service, which I think will be very important. It will be an important additional check, and we're working through the details of that. But what I would anticipate that looking at is the evidence which underpins the estimate that's been provided by the school. And I think there's another important aspect to all of this, is that, you know, when we do quality assurance, when we go into schools to do this work, it's done by teachers. You know, it's teachers that work with us, but it is absolutely the professional judgment of teachers, which is at the heart of this approach more generally. As I say, Robert might want to say a little bit more about the quality assurance process. Just before he does, just a final thing. We use data every year as part of our grade boundary process. Now, I'm conscious I'm 9 months in post, so I haven't gone through a standard year as yet in this role. But the grade boundary process every year looks at data of this kind. And while I would absolutely acknowledge that this is a very different year and we will not have the exam performance data that we normally have, it's really important that there are checks and balances in our qualification system. And I would say that the checks and balances have served, and this is the feedback that I get very very regularly from teachers and from education professionals and education leaders, that checks and balances approach actually has served Scotland really well, because it makes sure that we have that appropriate blend of evidence, data and judgment to make the right decisions for young people across Scotland every year.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move quickly to Mr. Quinn to respond to that question.
Quickly to say, yeah, moderation is about validating teachers' professional judgment. It's an external credibility check and also provides support to centres. And I think that should be no different in this particular case. And it should give confidence to the wider system, particularly points that Mr. Green was making in terms of the further uses of qualifications and the credibility of this year's qualifications for this year's cohort. But we do see in most cases when we moderate that teachers are on track and are on standard in terms of judgments. But we see it both ways. So an example could be the speaking assessment in modern languages. Quite often we see where there is an adjustment needed, it's to pull the teachers down a little bit. They'll be a little bit harsh. So moderation, as I say, can work both ways, and it's a good safety net for candidates. And I think that the final thing I would say is just to reinforce the point that Fiona said in relation to the post-results review process. It's important that, particularly this year, that we have an appropriate safety valve in place in order to pick up any areas of concern that teachers and their students will have to ensure that we can be as fair as possible and get that consistency and fairness once the whole process has been completed.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on. It's just to say we're a little behind time on where we would have hoped to have been at this point in the meeting. So if I could just ask for succinct answers, if possible at all, and as well succinct questions from my colleagues. Dr. Allen.
Convener, and good morning, Ms. Robertson. The question I've got is really to acknowledge the fact that we're all living through an extreme scenario, and perhaps one that nobody could have expected. But I just wondered, out of curiosity, prior to this all happening, whether the SQA had any kind of scenario plan in place to cope with any reason, natural or otherwise, why at some point it wouldn't be possible to hold an exam diet.
Ms. Robertson?
Yes. So we do, I think I mentioned it briefly in my opening statement, we do have contingency arrangements in place, so business continuity arrangements in place, as you would expect for any public sector organisation. And where there is deemed to be a significant risk to the exam diet, there is a procedure in place for the Scottish Government to convene its qualifications contingency group. And I had discussions with the Scottish Government about that in early March, and the first meeting of that group took place on the 17th of March to discuss these issues. And in that meeting, I took the range of colleagues, a range of stakeholders through the options that we were looking at. So, I mean, I think that the short answer is yes, we do have contingency arrangements in place, but I think, as I highlighted in my opening statement, the scale, complexity, timing and fluidity of the position that we found ourselves, all of us found ourselves in in the first half of March was simply unprecedented. And there was not an off-the-shelf alternative certification model sitting waiting to be used. And I think I would also highlight that was the position that other parts of other exam regulators were in across the UK. I think it's absolutely right that we have a range of contingencies in place, but the scale, as I say, the scale, complexity and challenge of this year was absolutely unprecedented.
Thank you. I appreciate that the focus. Thank you, Convener. I appreciate that the focus has to be on this exam diet at the moment, but as others have alluded to, already many teachers are beginning to ask about next year's exam diet. Obviously, we've been in a position where the focus has been on disruption primarily to the exam diet rather than, until now, disruption to the learning experience. But without trying to second guess what is going to happen over the next few weeks and months, obviously it's entirely possible that we're going to be into the autumn before people are beginning to get properly started on higher courses, for example. Has any thought been given to how the SQA works with other agencies to try and plan for those kind of contingencies and scenarios?
Ms. Robertson?
Yeah. Yes, I think it is a very important question, and I think we're all very conscious of impact, potential impacts on learning and teaching, and from the perspective of qualifications, courses being covered in the normal way at this time. We absolutely have started thinking, whilst preparing for Exam Diet 2021, as you would expect. Of course, we're starting to think about those issues. The Scottish Government has convened a group called the Education Recovery Planning Group, which is now meeting on a very regular basis. And part of the work of that group will be to look at curriculum and assessment issues, including the 2021 diet. I would highlight, that there's a very important piece here about the continuity of learning and teaching, and the extent to which that can be achieved, and therefore the consequences for exams towards the end of the year, but also the completion of coursework and the completion of evidence about what young people have been able to do. And I know that there's a big focus on that through work that Education Scotland are doing, through that work that are going across local authorities across Scotland, and indeed the Scottish Government. And that's really important. And indeed, we met with a number of colleagues met with Education Scotland colleagues yesterday just to discuss those very issues about continuity of learning and teaching in the senior phase, and what that might look like. So I think we're very live to those issues at the moment in thinking through next year.
Dr. Allen?
Thank you. And finally, if I can, returning to this year's exams, ask about a theme which I know that much of the evidence we've received, and much of what's been talked about around the scenario we're in just now has focused in on, and that's how different types of learners respond to exams. Again, I suspect there were very few alternatives available to the SQA other than to do what the SQA has done. However, I'm sure you would want to comment on this issue that's been talked around a lot now, which is about different types of learners. I would certainly have fallen into the category personally of the type of people who would have been, I hesitate to use the word lazy, but probably lazy when it came to my prelims, and then the exams put the fear of God into me. And I just wonder, one of the pieces of evidence we've received has, I think, suggested that boys are more prone to fall into that category than girls. So I just wonder if you're able to take account or how you've gone about trying to take account of some of those issues.
Ms. Robertson?
I think there are perhaps two parts to the answer to that question. One is about how schools are taking forward the work around their estimates, and ensuring that they consider the evidence that's available, and not just and what can be said around inferred attainment for this year based on the evidence that they have, and that can include later on in the year. I don't know if this would apply to yourself, Dr. Allen, later on in the year where there's evidence of an improved performance in the lead up to an exam. But if that is the case, then that absolutely can be taken account of in the estimated grade. And teachers are see this happen, and as I say, using an evidence-based approach, I think some account can be taken of that. More broadly, in terms of the information that we have about candidates, that and I think there's a broader issue in here about ensuring fairness and equity around certification. And those are some. I think those are issues that we're continuing to consider and look at. And indeed, there's a conversation this afternoon with some colleagues from the Human Rights Commission just around that broader equity piece in considering how different groups of young people how we think about different groups of young people in the awarding process this year. During an exam process, scripts are taken at face value. So so teachers marking those scripts know very little about young people and their marks, and through the marking process. And that's actually a very important part of ensuring that we don't have bias in the process. But I do understand the point that Dr. Allen is making in terms of the need to ensure that we do understand those issues. But I think there's quite a lot of focus that we can put on ensuring that teachers know young people best, and I think there is we've provided some guidance around those issues.
Thank you. I'm going to move to questions from Mr. Gray.
Very much, Convener. I'd like to return to this issue of moderation, because there has been quite a lot of confusion around this. So, for example, on the 21st of April, John Swinney said, talking about moderation, it's not saying that how a school did in the past determines how it does today. That's not in any way what the SQA are doing. What they are looking at is the comparison of assessment performance or estimation performance with final performance. However, the following day, in response to questions from the Times Educational Supplement, the SQA said about moderation again, this will include analyses of centres' estimates and outcomes, prior attainment, progression statistics and grade distributions. So for the avoidance of doubt, to try and ask this in a way which is clear to understand, does this mean then that a pupil who is given a pass grade by their teacher could have that grade reduced on the basis of previous poor performance in that school, or equally, a pupil who is given a fail grade by their teacher could have that raised up a grade on the basis of good performance by their school in the past?
Ms. Robertson?
So I'll start by just making it clear what I said on the 20th of April, and then I'll seek to answer Mr. Gray's question. So what I said on the 20th of April to the system was around, I took them through the 4-step process that we're taking this year. The second step of which was around awarding, which is we will check and validate the information provided to us by schools. We will moderate it if necessary to ensure consistency across schools and colleges and with results from previous years. We will use this information from these estimates in addition to prior learner attainment where that is available. For example, if learners achieved National 5 or higher courses in a previous year. We will also look at schools and colleges' previous history of estimating and attaining in each subject and level, and we may moderate these estimates up or down if that is required. And this process will produce the results for learners using our national grades for each subject and level. Each year we hold awarding meetings that bring together a range of people with subject expertise and people with experience of standard setting across different subjects and qualification levels, and we will maintain this approach this year as far as possible. So what I'm seeking to do is I'm seeking to use the range of evidence that is available to us, both about a school and also the broader performance of a subject, to reach what I consider to be the fairest set of results that we can. I understand that Mr. Gray's question is in particular in relation to will SQA fail a student who has been estimated a pass by their teacher. I guess a similar question could be asked about, will we pass a young person who may have been estimated to fail by their teacher? So I go back to the point that I raised in relation to the question that was asked by Mr. Green, which is the symmetry that we are putting, the presumption of symmetry that we're putting in place in any moderation process. And my focus, I think, importantly, has been on ensuring that we do everything that we can to make sure that the teachers have all the evidence that they need to make credible decisions around estimates. What I've outlined today is a safety, effectively a validation process to ensure that when I look across schools and when I look across the country, that an A grade in one school is, as far as possible, consistent with an A grade in another school, and so on. And that is the foundation of the approach that we are taking to estimates. And it is important that we are able to do that. And it is with fairness at its heart. The past, the mix, the volume and mix of attainment in a given school is one of those issues that we will look at, and that is not an unreasonable thing for us to be looking at. Indeed, schools themselves will be looking at that, and indeed have asked us for that information, both in terms of the work that they do every year in looking at estimates and assessing how accurate or otherwise those estimates are, but also in looking at the pattern of attainment that is achieved each year. So I hope that does give a bit of reassurance, because I do think that the assertion that somehow we will fail a young person because of the school that they go to, that feels unfair. That feels an unfair statement on the basis of what I've been seeking to say about the process that we are undertaking at the present time.
Mr. Gray?
I understand the reasons behind what you're doing, but I suppose my question is this: if there might be a specific reason in a school why a particular cohort this year have done better than their predecessors, will the SQA go to that school then and actually ask the school, why have you done better this year, and perhaps accept that explanation and not then pull them down to the same kind of distribution that we've seen in previous years?
So this may be helpful in response. We are looking in finalising the process whether there is a professional dialogue that we can enter into with the school around if the shape or distribution or indeed volume of attainment in a school this year looks very different to how it has historically looked, either in one direction or another, actually, then we're looking at whether we can, as part of the moderation process, enter into that kind of conversation. I hope that gives Mr. Gray some reassurance about the approach that we're taking. As I say, teacher judgment is at the heart of Scottish education, and it's actually also at the heart of our moderation process, both more generally and where possible this year. There's not a presumption here that we are going to overturn teacher estimates, but what I do have a responsibility to do is to ensure that there is broad consistency across the country. Now that's quite difficult. It's difficult to reach that level of assurance because of the real complexities this year, and the information that we have, and also the information that we don't have. So we don't have all the coursework, for example. We don't have all the information that we would like to be in receipt of, and that's led us to take some difficult decisions. But we are looking at the feasibility of ensuring that we can enter into that conversation with schools. particularly if there are big changes in pattern of attainment.
So a straight yes or no question on that. In order to achieve that fairness across the country and across years, do you intend to use any kind of statistical curve to moderate the results?
Ms Robertson?
Well, I'm conscious Mr Gray has asked me for a straight yes or no question. I think it is, and there is not a nice straight yes or no answer. I'm sorry that there's not, because I think it is appropriate for us to look at within a subject, it is appropriate for us to look at the distribution of attainment over time, but that will not be the only factor that we look at in reaching our judgment about grades this year. And it's important that I say that. It's important that I'm clear that that's not a straightforward yes or no answer.
Okay, and my last question, also a very direct one. There is you've talked quite a lot about the evidence which teachers will bring forward and the quality of that evidence and how important that is. There's some anecdotal suggestion now that in some schools the S3 Scottish National Standardised Assessments in Literacy and Numeracy are being used as part of the teacher assessment. Is that to be encouraged? Is it acceptable as part of the evidence?
Ms Robertson? If you could be succinct, we are running behind time now,
yes.
And we are hoping to be at this point in the meeting. Ms Robertson?
Well, as far as the information on evidence in completing the course, you would not be including standardised assessment as part of that suite of evidence. If the school wished to look at a wider range of evidence, including the results of standardised assessments, that's something that they'll want to consider. But it's not my role to make that judgment. We don't have access to any of that standardised assessment information that schools do. And schools across Scotland have a range of tracking and monitoring information, including through in some instances, many years of standardised assessment. The advice that we have provided to schools is that does not include any such consideration.
Okay, I'm going to move on to Ms Ross.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning. I wonder if the SQA could tell us what the model is that you're going to use to moderate grades, and how does this differ from other years?
Ms Robertson?
Well, I think I suppose I've tried to outline the broad approach that we're taking. Obviously, it's a different approach to the approach to awarding this year will be quite different to previous years on the basis of the absence of externally assessed information subject by subject. I think as I've highlighted, I've highlighted what I've said about the approach that we're taking, that we will use the data that we hold, and I've highlighted what that data is, and we're finalising the details, if you like, the decision rules around the final awarding process as we speak, and that will go forward to our qualifications committee, advisory council and board over the course of the next week or so. But I think as perhaps where there are common issues is that we'll be looking through a range of data, and we would also anticipate involving our subject specialists in looking across the 148 qualifications that we will need to award across National 5 Higher and Advanced Higher this year. Robert, do you want to say any more about that element of the process, just briefly?
Mr. Quinn?
Just very briefly, yeah, I mean, every year we look at a range of qualitative and quantitative information. So two key ones would be the prior, if we have it, prior attainment for candidates, and also what the estimates are telling us and the trend of these things. And there's a qualitative sense check. So as well as the statistical information that we get in terms of student performance, both current and historical, there's also a qualitative input in terms of what do we think the strength of the cohort is. You know, is there correlation between the prior attainment and what the teachers are telling us in terms of estimates and such like. And then a group of key people, assessment specialists and subject specialists, so use their collective wisdom to come to a decision as to where to draw the line and to finalise the awarding process.
Ms. Ross?
Thank you. I'd like to move on to ask about the ranking system. How will ranking individuals actually help with the reliability and validity of the qualifications?
Ms. Robertson?
So we've asked for, it's effectively a three-stage process this year, and as you highlight, that includes ranking as the third step. So what we've asked teachers to do is to provide estimates, to do the estimation process as they normally would, which is on a 9-point scale, and those estimated scales have been expanded to allow us a finer level of detail about the bands and grades that young people might get. But we're also asking for ranking information, and that will help us, should we need it, to provide more granularity on the relative performance of young people within a given cohort. You know, we worked through some of those issues with teachers in the development of the guidance. That if you like, the grade estimate looks at absolute performance. Now, I accept there's a degree of relativity in that across the grades, but what you're doing with ranking is that the ranking is looking at the relative performance of young people across a cohort group, and it does allow further differentiation between candidates. And that's why we've asked for both further estimated bands and rankings as well. It just gives us a much finer level of detail than we would normally get. At present, for some of our bigger subjects, if we preserved the estimates on the 9-point scale that we currently do, and Robert has English as one of his subjects, which of course is the largest uptake subject, and you've got thousands of young people in each band, and with no differentiation between you know, those thousands of young people in each band. So the ranking does help at a centre level look at the relative performance of young people. Now, I realise, particularly for larger cohorts or larger year groups or larger subjects, and again, going back to English would be a good example, there are some schools who have, you know, many classes of young people taking given a qualification, and we've provided a bit of guidance about how they might do that, because I do appreciate that in some instances that will be quite a challenging process. But it's also worth saying that a very large percentage of our qualifications at a centre level are less than 25 young people, and therefore that perhaps may be a little bit more straightforward. But we've provided as much guidance and assistance as we can on that.
Ms. Ross?
Thanks. Yeah, you say it's a challenging process, but one of the written submissions that we got in from a teacher said that it's the teaching profession's main concern. And a focus group that we held at the start of the week, and I will quote, have said that the system of ranking their students was abhorrent, repulsive, and that it goes against the values of teaching. What do you say to them?
Ms. Robertson?
Well, I think I've outlined the rationale for providing rankings, you know, I have to acknowledge the comments that have been made by the teachers in your focus groups. I think it's also important to acknowledge the feedback that we've had from teachers across a number of schools over the last week or so, who are working hard to deliver on that, with the understanding of why we have asked them to do it. And Robert's had some discussions with schools over the last week about the work that they're doing. And actually, for teachers who've been involved in teaching for a number of years, ranking was a feature of the system previously. So it is not new to Scottish education. Ranking used to be in a part of our appeals system a number of years ago. So it's not new. It's not new to Scottish education. I think I would highlight that. Robert might want to just say a little bit more about the feedback we've had, because I'm obviously very concerned to hear that teachers have felt very strongly about the ranking information. But we've sought to try and explain why we need it, and as I say, we've also had some feedback which is thankfully more positive.
Okay, Mr. Quinn.
Yeah, just quickly. Yeah, I mean, ranking is I suppose in terms of comparative judgment, is something that teachers do a lot. And actually, we've done some work in the past of actually using comparative judgment and particularly subjective-based subjects to actually help people mark more accurately. I.e., you judge a candidate's response in relative to the other responses that you use. So the feedback we've had is that people have found the ranking process in the smaller uptake or medium uptake areas, I've found it relatively straightforward, and it's helped them sort candidates into first of all their estimated band, and then secondly separate them via the ranking. But they don't see it necessarily as putting a badge on someone. It's just helping them with a comparative judgment. In the higher uptake subjects, it's more of a challenge because you've got the multiple classes and numbers, etc. We've done quite a bit of work around, just checking in with these types of subjects and making sure that they can use some limited ties and things like that, and helping them with their moderation process in order to support it.
Ms. Ross, are you?
Final question, convener. Thank you. Mr. Quinn, you say it's easier. Teachers have said to me that it's more difficult because they're pitting student against student and putting them into a list where they really don't want to be having to do that. In terms of fairness, which you keep going back to, how can it be fair if you rank pupils when you're also awarding, when you're doing the moderation, you look back at the other cohorts in the previous years, whether it's 3, and I hear that some schools are using 5 years. And how will this process then be evaluated once we go through this? Will we know how many pupils have been regraded due to your moderation? And you say that the bands will mean that pupils will go up as well as down. Will we know what percentage of pupils actually got the grade that their teachers were giving them?
Is Mr. Quinn, do you, or Ms. Robertson? I don't know who wants to answer that one.
Yeah, I'm happy to come
Mr.
in.
Quinn?
I think yes. I mean, we will. Teachers will know that at awards at the 4th of August. Teachers will know obviously the grades that candidates have been placed into, and we'll obviously take cognizance of that when we go through the national awarding process as well. And I think just to reinforce, if the teachers get the estimates right in the first place, and all the effort from teachers, commendable effort from teachers and SGA staff to support teachers to get these estimates right, then the hope is that there will not be much adjustment required nationally in order to, if you like, maintain that credibility of our qualifications this year, to ensure that the awards this year are as valuable as any other year. But at the point of awards day, yes, teachers will know that, and that's where potentially there'll be a consideration of whether they want to ask for a review, so that we can then start looking at individual cases, try and provide a safety net to ensure that there's a safe way of trying to pick up anything that's fallen through the cracks.
Can I bring in Mr. Greer, please?
Thank you, Convener. I'd like to go back first and hopefully briefly to this point about the use of a school's historical attainment data as part of the moderation for individual pupils' grades. Now, the Deputy First Minister suggested that that was not going to be the case, that that data would only be used to check the historical estimation of grades by teachers and see whether the estimation lined up with final attainment. Now, from what the SQA has said today, that's not the case, that this will be a data point used directly in the moderation of individual pupils' grades. Logic would then suggest, as Mr. Gray indicated, that is going to disproportionately disadvantage pupils in schools in less high achieving areas which correlate directly with deprivation. So can I ask if an equality impact assessment has been done on the decision to include the historical attainment data of schools in the moderation of individual pupils' grades?
Ms. Robertson?
Yes, so I think, as I mentioned, we're in discussions with the Human Rights Commission, Equality and Human Rights Commission, about the work that we're doing to assure ourselves that the approach that we're taking is fair, and that will include our work around equality impact assessment. I think I would really just like to reiterate the point about the information that we will use to inform the moderation process, but highlighting that the school itself will be looking at that information alongside information on individual young people. And I do think it's really important to give some reassurance around that in looking at the suite of information that we have, that we're looking to come to the fairest judgments about awarded grades as possible. I think the representation that has some representations have been made infers that would not be the case. But what we're seeking to do here is, as I say, in unprecedented circumstances, to ensure that we're taking the best decision.
Ms. Robertson, but we're extremely short on time. Can I just get clarification? You've not conducted an equality impact assessment on this. Can you confirm that you are going to do so, and that it will happen before the end of this month when teachers have to submit their estimations?
Ms. Robertson?
Work has been done on an equality impact assessment, I can assure you of that, and we are having discussions about that. That in the normal way we would expect. There is no reason for us during this process to be lacking in transparency about the approach that we're taking. But I think, I have acknowledged that we're working through a range of issues as things stand. We have also included in the SQA Academy course issues in relation to potential bias around estimation, to ensure that at the point that the estimate is provided, that is minimised, and that's an important part of the advice that we have provided to schools as well. And this is an issue.
On that point of transparency, then I would. Thank you. On the point of transparency, I would then expect that the equality impact assessment is published as soon as it's completed. But to continue the point of transparency around this model overall, the 10-page document, the detailed guidance that's been sent to schools and teachers and that has been published in the public domain doesn't include your methodology. It doesn't include the model. Now, from what you've said this morning, I believe that's because that's not quite completed yet, which is fair enough. But can you confirm that as soon as the final methodology has been agreed and signed off, that it will be put into the public domain?
Ms. Roberts?
I think when the certification model is concluded, I think it's important for us to consider at what point that the full details of that are published. I think, and I say that. I say that because I think it's very important that the detailed, if you like, decision rules around certification I think we need to consider carefully at what point that the full details of that are published. I'm very happy to provide as much information as I can to assist the system in delivering what it needs to do for us in order to certificate. But I think there are elements of this process that need to be treated as a normal year, and by that I mean considering carefully at what point we publish details about the precise or the more precise details about certification. That will be something that the Qualifications Committee and Advisory Council will be considering, and we will put that. Obviously, that will be something that the board that I'm accountable to, and who in turn are accountable to ministers, will wish to consider as well.
I appreciate the considerations you made. The issue at the moment is there is not widespread confidence amongst teachers and pupils in this system, and transparency may increase confidence in it, and that will be critical. One final question to go back to Ms Ross's points about ranking. You might have seen the article in the Times Education supplement for Scotland from a teacher highlighting issues with this. Makes the point that in your new refined band 8, which is a notional range between 62 and 64%, he might have 3 pupils that he needs to put in that. So the odds are those 3 pupils are not going to neatly set 1, 2, 3 from 64, 63, 62. Therefore, there are going to be ties. But the SQA doesn't want there to be ties. At that point, that teacher has to split hairs. Who does he think might have been a 63.7 or a 63.2 and try and rank like that? Does the SQA accept that that is false precision and there is no statistical value to that?
Ms Robertson?
I think in the interest of brevity, I think I've set out my position in relation to the rationale for providing, for asking for rankings. I think we've also acknowledged that for some subjects that will be quite challenging. We have not said that ties are not allowed. I think what we're trying to encourage teachers to do is to provide us with as much differentiation as possible, which will help us in the awarding process.
Thank you, Mr. Weir. Just to remind everyone, I have 4 members still to come in, so we'll swiftly move on to Ms Wishart.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, panel. Mr Greer has actually covered one of the questions I was going to ask about the ranking, so I won't go over it again. I'm aware that we are short of time. But I'm also concerned about behaviour bias in this assessment. If a teacher puts forward 15 pupils in the B9 bracket, and they're all saying that they're between 60 and 61%, ranking them within this already small bracket means that teachers are being asked to grade them by fractions of a percent. So in the absence of any other academic justification, won't other factors inevitably come into play? I mean, if a pupil isn't as confident or as memorable in a class, or as a pupil that mucks around, could they get a lower ranking on that basis? On the flip side, I mean, a pupil with a more engaged parent, would that elevate them up the rankings? So what else will teachers make these minute judgments on?
Can I bring in Ms Robertson?
Yeah, so as I say, we've provided some information to teachers on unintentional bias in our academy course. I might ask Robert just to provide just a bit more detail on the piece around notional percentages. I think notional percentages can be at times a bit of a distraction from the task in hand, because they are notional percentages, and I realise that the example you've just given is obviously a very small notional percentage, but Robert, I think, can provide perhaps hopefully a little bit more helpful information on that to assist with that question.
I'm going to bring in Mr Quinn. Can I just quickly add a supplementary to Ms Bishop brought in the idea of parental pressure. Obviously, the estimation process has gone into being a high stakes activity for teachers and for schools, and has moved its position from where it was previously. So could you maybe also answer about the parental pressure, but also pressure from pupils who have expectations of entry to university based on results, and also external pressure, which teachers will talk about and the unions will talk about, pressure from management to sort of inflate in some way some of the estimates that are going through. Thank you. Mr. Quinn.
Yep. Just quickly on the estimating process and the extended bands and the notional figures, I accept that point. It looks very narrow in terms of numbers. What we're encouraging teachers to do is not focus on the numbers, but focus on the holistic view of the candidate. So if they're near the band above, then they go into the top extended band within the original band. If they're solid within the band, then they go into the lower one, or they're just ahead of the band before. So it's more of a holistic judgment, and we use that quite a lot in our marking processes when people are marking essays and such like. It's the totality of everything rather than a specific number. So that's one of the ways in which we're sort of dealing with that process. In terms of the point around parental pressure and indeed other pressure, well, I mean, again, the guidance tries to focus very much on the view of the teacher as a professional, and the fact that they have to try and eliminate any kind of bias or undue process. And there is a moderation process within. We're looking at least 2 teachers within each subject to get involved in the estimating process, and a wider moderation within a departmental perspective, so that by the time it then goes to any other process like senior management, etc., it's already been through a very rigorous departmental level internal process, and therefore, you know, that would provide a measure of protection and professionalism, so that it's unlikely that will be, you know, the senior management role is just to confirm that that's happened, rather than to try and unduly change things.
Ms. Wishart.
Thank you. Taking into account the emphasis that is on the relationship between the student and the teacher, knowing their abilities, what happens in a scenario where a teacher or a pupil has recently moved school and there's no knowledge, no background knowledge there?
Ms. Robertson.
I mean, I think, of course, there will be instances during the estimation process where schools will want to look at the individual circumstances of a young person, and that might include them having moved school. I mean, I think, frankly, the thing to do there would be to speak to their previous school where possible, and to make sure that connection is made, so that the best and most informed estimate is provided to in the context of the new school. I mean, in Scotland, with the approach that we've got with ongoing internal assessment and coursework, usually a young person will have a relationship both with a school or college, but also with one or more teachers during the course of the year. And that will be very helpful in this process. I know in England there's been obviously some concern about private candidates who may not have a relationship with a school or college at all. But in Scotland, given the nature of the assessment framework, and also the way in which awards are entries for qualifications are submitted through schools and colleges, I think that risk is quite significantly reduced.
Ms. Wishart?
Thank you. The final question is just sort of turning this around on its head a bit as to who actually the whole process is benefiting, because one of this committee's focus groups participants thought that the ranking was unacceptable and went against the principles of curriculum for excellence. So that you could say the whole system seems to be built in the interest of the SQA, not the learners or the teachers. So is it the case that the SQA know what the results are going to be and it's reverse engineering a system to get there?
Ms. Robertson?
No, I wouldn't accept that characterisation of what we're doing here. I mean, my principal focus is on the interests of learners during this process. I think we're all acknowledging in the discussion this morning that we're in a very difficult position. There's a lot of anxiety in the system, and our job is to provide reassurance to the system to ensure that young people can have confidence in the work that both their teachers and the SQA are doing in working together to deliver for them. I don't have a set of results waiting in the wings at all. We are waiting on the estimates that teachers are providing, and we will make the best judgments in the circumstances. And that's my absolute focus is on the learner.
Going to move on to Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Convener. I'd like to begin by following on from Ross Greer's line of questioning. Clearly, the moderation process can't be a black box. And while I understand the sensitivity around releasing your methodology and the sensitivity of the timing of that, there are two critical time points for that methodology being in place. One is when teachers are submitting their estimated grades, and the other is when the learners receive their grades. Can I ask whether the methodology will be published in full prior to the submission of the grades, or at the very least, will it be published prior to learners receiving their grades?
Ms. Robertson?
So I understand I understand the characterisation. I think that there are phases to this work. So we've got the period between now and the end of May, and we're focused on assisting teachers with their estimation process, and we're providing data, and we're also providing and we're building new systems as we speak in order to do that. And then there's the process of awarding that we will be taking forward between the end of May and effectively into middle of July before certification. As I say, this issue of what further materials we publish will be further discussed next week. But I think absolutely there should be a presumption of openness and transparency, and that I would expect on results day this year to be very clear about the process that we have undertaken, and indeed the resulting awards that we have provided to young people, including whether there are differences between the estimates that young people receive from their school and any subsequent moderation by the SQA. And obviously within schools there'll be absolute clarity at an individual level about. So I do want to give I do want to give a bit of assurance around that presumption of transparency. I think you're right in saying, Mr. Johnson, that this is not a black box. It's not a black box, and it will involve a range of processes and a range of information to help inform us, and that is in common with our approach every year, actually, albeit that this is quite different. It's quite a different year. That is the approach. We take that kind of approach in every year.
Mr. Johnson?
Well, I look forward to clarification on the timetable, and I just provide the comment that if a methodology is robust enough to use to award grades, it should be robust enough to publish. But I do need to move on. I mean, I think people have rightly focused on the estimated grades in terms of potential differences between schools or even potentially between teachers. But I'd quite like to focus a little bit about the differences between subjects. If I look at and indeed kind of more esoterically, what it will be that it assesses. So on that second point, if I look at your guidance you've issued, you describe the estimation process as being a holistic assessment by teachers. Now, one comment that came back from the focus group was that that's not actually what an exam does. An exam gives you an assessment of a specific point in time. So is there a sense that this is actually providing assessment of something a bit different, which is performance through the year? Or are you asking teachers to estimate what the performance of people would have been in an exam, in which case you're actually asking them to estimate a portion of learning which is not going to take place because they'd have continued to learn past the point of lockdown. So there's that esoteric point of what is the estimate actually going to be estimating and be a grade. But then secondly, some subjects will have quite a lot of coursework, either because of the nature of them. More quantitative subjects may have more data available as opposed to subjects like art, Also, teaching practice might come into this. So some teachers may do weekly class tests in a more traditional sense, perhaps in a way even that has been discouraged. What assessment is being made of those differences between subjects in terms of available coursework and what would have been assessed in the exam, and indeed about the potential differences in teaching practice that might exist between different subjects?
I'm going to bring in Ms Robertson, reminded that one of the focus groups had made the point that many teachers don't have access to coursework for subjects such as tech and art because of the nature, pupils take them home. So it was another challenge for moderation, but I'll bring in Ms Robertson.
I will bring in Robert Quinn here just to provide a little bit more detail. I think it's a good point around the issue around the fact that across different subjects there are different assessment approaches to reflect the nature of the learning and the course for each subject, and we've been working with teachers, subject specialists, to work through some of those issues. And on the issue of the estimate and the nature of the holistic assessment, I think I will hand over to Robert on that one. I think the only thing I would say is that the foundation of the guidance on the estimates is on what teachers have done every year, which is to provide us with estimates. And we're asking for a further level of granularity to those estimates for this year, given the circumstances that we find ourselves in. So teachers will have a level of familiarity. I'd absolutely take the point that for this year, we may not be talking about a completed course because of the timing and nature of school closures. And so therefore, as well as it being a holistic assessment, it has to include a degree of inferred judgment based on the evidence of a young person that's available to the teacher from a young person. But Robert, do you want to just pick up that point, that kind of more esoteric point that Mr. Johnson's made?
Mr. Quinn?
Yep, I can do. I suppose the first thing to say is that estimating is not just about determining what score somebody's going to get in an examination, because I think, as you rightly said, our courses, and particularly in Scotland compared to the rest of the UK, are very much built on a range of assessment methods, and coursework is at the heart of most of our national courses. So it's not just about trying to second guess what somebody can get in the examination. It's more about looking at the knowledge and skills of the course and coming to a determination as to where the young person should fit in the context of grade criteria. For me, estimating it is a subjective process, and it's not a one-size-fits-all, and it is very much dependent on the particular subject and the nature of the assessment and indeed teaching and learning associated with that subject. And essentially it's about three things. It's about the teacher understanding their candidates, that's the most critical thing, and their own professional background and their department's background in terms of what this evidence represents, in terms of what it represents for for candidates previously, and what it represents for candidates this year, in terms of judging where they should go in terms of performance in the course overall. It's understanding their subject, and then finally it's understanding the standards. And our job is to obviously help with understanding the standards and to illustrate that. So there's not a one size fits all in terms of estimating. Teachers will sit down and they will look at the makeup of the course, they will look at the balance between coursework and examination, and they'll look at the different types of formative and summative assessment approaches that will give you evidence to support the key knowledge and skills that are assessed in each subject, and then holistically pulling that together and determining, well, this is where I think my young person is going in terms of a grade. And reflecting on previous years' estimates versus results, reflecting on discussions in departments, reflecting on discussions at a local authority levels or with SQA in terms of understanding standards, and then coming to a decision in terms of an overall grade.
Okay, I've got a final quick question from Mr. Johnson, and hopefully a very quick answer, please, Mr. Johnson.
As a brief one, which is a supplementary to Jamie Green's questions. So can I just ask, you said that the Scottish Government made the decision not to hold exams this year. Was it the Scottish Government which also made the decision not to allow people to sit an exam in the autumn, given that some pupils, if they're sitting A levels, which a small number of people will do in Scotland, will be able to? Was that your decision, or was it the Scottish Government's?
It was the Scottish Government's decision that there could not be an exam diet in 2020, given the public health concerns and the uncertainty around schools reopening. It was on that basis the decision was taken. I think it's important that I highlight that. Obviously, I discussed that with the Deputy First Minister, and I agreed with that. The conclusion, I absolutely agreed with that decision, and it's on that basis that we've been taking the work forward.
Okay, I'm going to move to questions from Alec Neil.
Hi, Convener, thank you. My question's around appeals, Fiona. At a focus group held earlier this week, a number of teachers indicated that they're very unclear about the criteria for the appeals procedure and so on. And also there was a particular concern around appeals will be assessed. Can you give us a quick overview of the approach to appeals, and can you tell us when teachers are going to be told what the appeal process is, please?
Okay.
Ms. Robertson? Yeah.
Yes, happy to do that. I mean, I think I would highlight again that the final detail of the appeals process is currently going through some of our internal governance, but crucially that also includes the views of teachers and others. I think what we're anticipating is that there is an opportunity to appeal if a school is unhappy with the grade awarded by SQA in August, and what we will be looking at is the evidence that the school has around the estimated grade, but we're working through the final details of that, and I would anticipate that we would be, well, I would certainly hope that we can provide some further guidance to the system as soon as we can in relation to the final details of the appeals process. I think it's right at the moment that we are focused on the estimation process rather than the safety net. You know, the key focus of the work that we're doing is to focus on getting, helping teachers and working with the system on the estimation process. But by except thereafter, the appeals process and clarity around the appeals process is important, not just for schools, but also for young people as well. And we'll seek to do that as soon as we can.
Can I ask?
Apologies, Mr. Neil, we're not actually seeing you, just to let you know, but we can hear you, so please continue.
All right, I can see myself actually. But a number of questions arise from that. Number one, as well as consulting teachers, are you consulting pupils and parents, number one? Number two, given the exceptional circumstances of this year, as well as schools being able to lodge an appeal, is there not some logic to allowing pupils or their parents to lodge an appeal, given the very unusual circumstances and processes in place this year? And thirdly, coming back to the whole issue of equality assessment, evidence from research done by the Department of Business, Innovation and Skills in London tends to show that when it comes to black and minority ethnic groups, in terms of marking in particular, they, for some reason, tend to come out more inaccurate than the other people being assessed. So is there not a need, really, given that information, to look at black and ethnic minority communities in particular, but other socio-economic groups who are generally disadvantaged, and provide analysis?
Okay. On the first question that Mr. Neil has asked about seeking the views of young people and their parents, I can confirm that young people and parents are represented on the two groups that I mentioned, the Advisory Council and the Qualifications Committee. And that supplements other discussions that we're having, as you would expect, with a range of stakeholders as part of the work that we're doing. But they're formally represented on that, if you like, that governance infrastructure that we have. Yes, I'm familiar with the BIS research, and the BIS research relates to predicted grades for the purposes of university entry. So UCAS predicted grades, which tend to be provided much earlier in the academic year, and frankly for a different purpose as well. As I say, I think the difficulty that we have, but we are looking at, is that at present, when we get entries for schools from schools, it doesn't provide us with other information about the characteristics of a young person. So, for the purposes of a year in which an exam is taken, the exam script, if you like, is taken is taken as on its own. So I think I understand the point that Mr. Neil is making about the need to ensure that we consider those issues as far as we can. I know that the Sutton Trust have responded to an Ofqual consultation in similar terms. So I think that's something that we want to consider and discuss further about the extent to which we can look at those issues. But I would say again, what we've been doing is providing some advice to schools as part of our online course about bias, and the point that Robert has highlighted about, if you like, the checks and balances, if you like, within the school, to seek to ensure that any issues are both considered and indeed, if need be, challenged, is there too.
Okay. My final question, convener, a very quick one, is I fully appreciate that you have to prioritise the work programme given how tight a timetable you're working to. Can you give us some indication of when you'll be able to publish the methodology being used and the arrangements for appeals, please?
Yes, so on the arrangements on appeals, I think should be provided, reasonably quickly. As I say, the focus of our work is on the estimation process, and there's quite a lot that goes underneath that in terms of our systems and processes. And it's involved us building new software, for example, around the estimation process and how that is processed by SQA. So the appeals process, I would anticipate the details will be provided quite soon. As I say, the issue in terms of the full details of the model, I think, needs to be considered further for the reasons that I've outlined. I mean, it's purely for the reasons that I've outlined in the context of us being able to award the principles of awarding in the normal way, despite the fact it's not a normal year. So I think that needs to be considered a bit further, and I'm not able to give you a final and definitive answer on that today. That will be considered further by the processes that I've outlined today. But I understand the point that's been made, and I can give you an assurance that, as I say, the presumption of transparency is absolutely front and centre here.
Thank you.
Just before I move to the final member for questions, I've got a brief supplementary from Mr. Green.
Thank you, convener. So one of the responses we got to me was quite stark in terms of what it's asking the SQA to take away from all this feedback, and it asked for three simple things: clear and open communication, a simple timeline of the processes involved, and clear information on the appeals process for teachers, parents and pupils. Can I ask the SQA if they would commit to meeting those three requests from the sector?
Ms. Robertson?
Mr. Green, I don't think that's an unreasonable request. And I hope in the detail that I've provided to you today, I hope that gives you some reassurance about the work that we've done to date. albeit in challenging circumstances, to fulfil its, as much of what you've outlined there as possible, around the work that we have done to regularly and fully communicate with teachers and others. We have, in the communication that I gave to schools on the 20th of April, I also gave a broad timeline around further information that we'd be providing to school over the next few weeks. And I absolutely take the point about the appeals process. I felt it was important to prioritise the work that schools needed to progress now, and on that basis, the guidance on estimates felt to me like the priority in terms of giving schools a maximum amount of time. In our original timeline, estimates were due to be in on the 24th of April. We've obviously absolutely reasonably extended that to the 29th of May. But we also have a tight timetable thereafter to the 4th of August, and so we have been prioritising. But I think I can give the commitment that Mr. Green has outlined as much as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Halcrow-Johnson, please.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon now to the panel. My question is similar in some ways to Daniel Johnson's, but it's looking really at the college sector. So I was just wondering, in terms of HNCs and HNDs, when the SQA will be able to complete its review of subjects where alternative approaches to assessment aren't suitable, and also when you'll be able to provide the kind of necessary initial guidance to colleges.
Ms. Robertson?
I think I'm glad that the college sector has been highlighted here, because that's also been a very significant part of the work that we're doing. National qualifications are in colleges, but obviously colleges have a range of qualifications on offer. We've been working really closely with Colleges Scotland and with staff of colleges right across Scotland. And we provided a joint statement in relation to higher national qualifications on the 26th of March. And there's been some further guidance issued on the 2nd of April in relation to HNCs in particular, quite a lot of detailed guidance. That is being followed up by subject-specific guidance, in particular for areas in which there are practical components to the learning in particular courses. And indeed, I was speaking to a number of college principals over the last number of weeks. I mean, I think they've been very happy with the work that we've been doing to progress, again, some quite complex issues in what we call the HNVQ space over this period. But we'll be looking to provide further subject-specific support very, very shortly. That's at an advanced stage.
Mr. Halcrow-Johnson?
Thanks very much for that an update. Can I just confirm with you that subject-specific guidance is already being rolled out? Is it being rolled out as it's available, or is it? Are you looking to kind of put it out in one specific bubble for kind of clarity? How's that being rolled out? And also, which are the kind of subjects that you feel there has been most concern or most complications with providing assessment for?
Ms. Robertson?
But perhaps I could follow that up I could follow some of the detail on that up with the committee in terms of the kind of the programme, the forward programme. But we are, as I say, working through those subjects. I think we are giving as much guidance, giving guidance as and when it is ready. As I say, I think that some of the challenges in particular are around those areas where there are practical components that may be difficult to complete at the present time. I mean, Robert might want to say a little bit more about that in the context of some of the subjects he's responsible for. Perhaps bring him in there just for a bit more detail, if that would be helpful.
Okay, Mr. Quinn?
Yeah, I mean, the most subjects are covered by the generic guidance, Mr. Halcrow-Johnson. So the generic guidance gives colleges and their quality departments the freedom to adapt based on a decision-making process or decision-making tree that we've created. But there are some subjects where things like licence to practice or health and safety considerations are such that there's regulatory aspects that would give us significant issues if the assessment evidence wasn't in place. So those particular subjects, maybe things like childcare, etc. There are very specific areas that we need further consideration and specific adaptation. And my understanding is we're working hand in glove with Scottish colleges and lecturers in the college sector on that rollout. We can come back with some more specific detail, but I think it will be rolled out in conjunction with Scottish colleges rather than just independently from SQA. So it'll be a kind of joint work stream.
Mr. Halcrow-Johnson.
Yeah, thanks very much, Convener. Just finally on that, I mean, we don't know how long this current situation is going to continue. We don't know yet the full impact in terms of when things will get back to even near normal, but normal. So I take it part of the work that you'll be doing will be looking to the future and how perhaps for next year, particularly with these courses, these subjects where it's more difficult to do standard kind of assessments, it will be building in some sort of resilience or some sort of system into that. Is that something you're doing at the moment, or is that kind of something that you'll be planning to do looking forward?
Ms. Robertson.
So that work, we're working through some of those issues now. I think we're very mindful of the fact that of the position that we're in, and that may continue. Across the whole suite of qualifications, we're working through these issues. As I mentioned, I think earlier in the session, there's an education recovery planning group in place, which is considering these issues in the round, because it's not just about qualifications. Qualifications are important, but it's about the whole it's about the whole system, and the issue around continuity of learning and teaching and fairness actually is key. So yes, the short answer is we're working through those issues just now, and I suppose that there may be some qualifications where it's very difficult not to pause, and Robert highlighted in particular licence to practice qualifications. I think there'd be quite a lot of concern on some aspects of those qualifications if we did anything other than that. But there are others where adaptation is possible, and we're working through those issues at the moment. And I have to say, really collaborative work going on right across Scotland's colleges at the moment. A huge amount of collaborative work, and we've been getting very positive feedback about that, about the approach that we've been taking, and that's been very heartening.
Thank you very much, and I think that concludes questions from the committee this morning. Can I thank our witnesses from the SQA for their attendance at committee. Our next meeting will be on Wednesday morning, where we will take evidence from the Cabinet Secretary for Education and Skills, John Swinney, in response to the coronavirus outbreak. And that concludes the public part of today's meeting. Thank you everyone for their attendance.